Okay, great. I want to say a very big thank you to everyone who's joined us today, especially the team from the Carlson School of Management, University of Minnesota. We thank you very much for your time, and we hope we'll have a wonderful session today. You are actually signing in into the MBA for Africa webinar organized by Lane. And Lane is a community of MBA students, alum, and enthusiasts looking to leverage their MBA experience for a more politically and economically inclusive Africa. And one thing we're currently trying to do right now is, as part of an MBA program that some of us, as well as current students who are in the community, have seen, is that Africa's representation in global MBA programs could be a lot better. And we felt that we could take a step as our own way of giving back to the society, of making things work, that we could build something that is non for profit, but could do play a big role in ensuring that those who are qualified for an MBA experience do not lack the resources and access to information that they need to get into various MBA programs. And part of the way we've been doing that is, first of all, organizing webinars with current African MBA students across boards in terms of different schools. And now we've slowly moved into admission officers from top MBA programs around the world. So thank you to Jennifer and the team for making this possible with Carlson. And yeah, and we can start now. So to just kickstart things, I'd like to go with now. Again, please, as you join, it would be great if you mute yourself. Franklin, I think you can help me out with that. Thank you. I want us to start with 2020 is 2020 doesn't feel like a year. I know that's the conversation we started earlier on. And sometimes I feel like it's 10 years in one. Other times I just feel like, can someone just take it out of everyone's experience, and then we can, stop counting our age and begin next year when COVID ends. Susanna, for you, what has been your experience with COVID, managing that, and what is one of the biggest lessons that you think you've learned so far?
So I actually think I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the positives that have come out of this. One of the things that we had to do in March, when we all basically got shut down, and I had to pivot to running my program online, and we'll get more into my program a little bit later. One of the things I realized was, first of all, that the material that we're engaging with was so incredibly relevant to people's experience, that we really managed to keep students' attention and engage them in a really deep way with what we're trying to learn. The other thing that was actually kind of exciting was we ended up having students participating in our program from across the world. So one of my favorite stories is about we have a team of students that works on the telecom and media sector. And that team of students has people participating from Malaysia, from China, from 3 different states in the US. And yet we're all able to connect together and sort of bring our own unique experiences to this. In many ways, this has been a really intense and disruptive experience, but I think a lot of good can come out of the disruption. And so I think our ability to figure out how to work together as a team across the globe has been really exciting for me.
Right. Thank you very much, Susanna, for that. And just to mention, if you don't know who Susanna is, she is the managing director of the Carlson Funds Enterprise. I'm sure she will talk about that in a lot more details as we go on. But I think it's important to note that it's the largest student-run investment program in the country, like in the whole of the United States, and it offers both graduate and undergraduate students the kind of experiential learning that we'll dive into as this goes on. Let me come to David. David is a second-year student at Carlson School of Management, an MBA student for that matter. How's the experience been with COVID?
First, I want to say hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us today. And to answer your question, Samuel, So it's been a very different experience the second year as opposed to the first year for obvious reasons. But Carlson's done a really good job doing everything they can to adjust on the fly and be able to retain as much of the experiential learning and interaction and connection as they can from while moving this to an online environment. I've been very fortunate where I've had at least one of my classes has still been able to meet in person. So they've been able to do things. We sat a little bit more spread out than normal in a bit of a bigger auditorium. So that was a little bit different there. But Carlson's been able to provide still some in-person experience while also shifting everything to a more virtual setting as well.
Great, thank you very much for that. Let's now move to Jennifer. What does that look like for you so far?
Well, for admissions and recruiting, it's certainly been completely opposite of last year. Last year, I actually had the privilege of coming to Nigeria and meeting some really amazing students with the MBA tour. And it's like the highlight of my year to travel and meet students where they are on the road. And so that's been really different. But I think to Susanna's point earlier, the accessibility piece has been sort of that offset because I've been able to maybe reach more students. Maybe somebody, if they couldn't come to that one night I was in Nigeria and Lagos, maybe I didn't get a chance to meet them. And so now with multiple opportunities in a virtual format, I think there's a little bit more opportunity there, like doing this presentation, which was great. And I think for us too, recruiting looks a little bit different just in general, because we're not meeting students on the road, because we had a lot of deferrals from last year, because we're thinking about funding and accessibility of getting students here. We're sort of having to rethink our recruiting and admission strategy. So a lot of things are happening on the fly. You'll notice a lot of schools in the US transition to offering a GMAT waiver to try to just make the degree a little bit more, make the admissions process a little bit more accessible. So we're certainly doing things and trying to be more accessible and trying to be creative. So I think that's sort of the bright spot that has come out of COVID and recruiting for admission staff.
Right. Thank you very much all for that introduction. And I think before we delve into all the specific questions, some of which I believe would be answered in the presentation you have for us, let's just delve right into that.
Great. If you could share, give me screen access.
Right. Yeah. And fun fact, I met Jennifer last year when we could still fly, and that was how this whole experience in relationship and networking started. So that's one of the unquantifiable benefits of these trips that you really can't put on paper as to some of the things, but it's been amazing, and thank you for the journey we've had together from October up until this point.
So true. I know.
Right. You have the answer. Share.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So I'll jump right in. So as you're thinking about MBA programs, and when I was talking to Samuel, I'll back up. When I was talking to Samuel about presentation and topics, he suggested experiential learning and then was like, well, and if you want to do something else, that's okay too. And I was like, no, I want to do experiential learning because it is so important to your MBA experience as you're talking to schools. And so whether you're, actively filling out applications or you're just sort of starting to think about what an MBA means, this is mostly what an MBA program is made out of, at least if it's a two-year program. So, every school is going to offer you these core classes that lay a business foundation. They're really going to, cover all aspects of business, strategic management, financial management, and you'll get a really good foundation, and then you're typically able to build on that with specialization. So if you're interested in finance or if you're interested in entrepreneurship, schools will typically have, a handful or more specializations that you can choose from to really be intentional about what you study in your MBA. And then there's usually a global experience component. This has sort of evolved over time where they want you to have that international focus, that cultural ability to think, to become a culturally competent leader. And then there's experiential learning. And I feel like experiential learning has sort of been this term that we've had to demystify as admissions staff, because it's an umbrella term that every school uses, but it can mean something very different at every school. So as we go through this, I want to define experiential learning and then talk a little bit about how it can be different and how you can decide what experiential learning looks best for you. Okay, so experiential learning by far is the most immersive opportunity. It's really able for you to bridge the theory that you're learning in your core classes, in your specialization classes, and then put that directly into practice. It's also a really great way to, try something new, take on more leadership roles. And if you don't do well or you fail, you sort of have this safety net because you have a faculty director like Susanna helping you, and you have other team members there to really, really support you. So these are the ways in which it's a benefit. You're able to try, you're able to have this experience that you're able to build on in your internship. And then the other piece of this is what recruiters say. So this is the companies that come on campus to Carlson and what they say about our students and the enterprise program and the value that that brings when they go to their company. And it's just those hands-on, that practical experience, that project management, and really feeling like you're hiring someone who's able to immediately hit the ground running. There's certainly an onboarding process when you start a new job, but the MBA program has been built and the experiential learning at Carlson has been built to make sure that that transition process is as smooth as possible. So this is what at Carlson specifically the required experiential learning looks like. There's actually other experiential learning that's more industry specific that I'll briefly mention, but we're going to spend most of our time today talking about these four experiential learning opportunities. The first three are the brands enterprise, the consulting enterprise, and the ventures enterprise. These are all based on a consulting model, which generally means that, in general, you're working with real companies on live projects and expected to provide a business solution. The brands enterprise focuses on the full life cycle of marketing. So if you're interested in marketing, it's a good focus to have. The consulting enterprise is certainly the most wide-ranging in its projects that you can choose from. So as you would be a consultant, it could be a merger and acquisition, it could be a logistics project or a go-to-market strategy, but really to help you prepare those skills if that's ultimately your career goal. The ventures enterprise is still more consulting model, but it's more focused on either innovation or you could potentially be working with a startup company or an established company that's sort of looking for an internal venture opportunity. And then the funds enterprise, which we'll certainly highlight today, is based on an investment model where, as Samuel mentioned, students have $50 million in funds that they're managing in either a growth or fixed income fund. And you're sort of buying and selling every week. So where the brands, consulting, and ventures, you're sort of working on this long project over the course of the semester. The funds enterprise is very much in real time, and you're seeing those decisions and the outcomes of those decisions being made. Beyond those enterprises, we also have experiential learning that's specifically focused in healthcare, which most of the time is a new medical device or technology that students are doing some market analysis on. And we also have within our entrepreneurship specialization, a startup class and a product design class. So if you're looking to launch a new venture, that's a really great opportunity to really work on and build out that opportunity. So zooming out a bit, I think when you're looking at schools, there's some really good questions to ask about what makes the experiential learning at that specific school different. So questions like, what kind of opportunities are there? how do I get my first choice of a project I want to work on? How many semesters of experiential learning do I get? Because, part of the reason why experiential learning is so important is, yes, you're applying theory to practice, but most of the time, MBA students are making some sort of career pivot. They're making some sort of transition. So whether that is, coming and wanting to work in the US, maybe that's a career pivot, maybe it's a functional pivot, maybe it's a double jump or a triple jump. So when you're making those pivots, you need that support, you need that experience to help you, market yourself and market your skills to future employers. So you want to make sure that you're getting this experience to help that career transition. And sometimes it even leads to, the companies that you're working with in a new career, but at least, wanting to make sure that you're getting the opportunities to get those skills. So for example, at Carlson, all full-time MBA students must complete 2 required semesters of one of those enterprises. So once you choose one of the 4 enterprises I just talked about, you will be in that for 2 full semesters, which are 14 weeks at Carlson. And the way they're placed is there's one 14-week enterprise, your spring semester of your first year. And so while you're doing classes, you're also working on in the enterprise. And then you go to your internship over the summer, which is like May to like beginning of August, although they can sort of fluctuate. And then you come back and you do the same enterprise. And if you're doing one of those consulting models, you work on a different project, or the funds can be a little bit different, but you'll work again 14 weeks within that enterprise. And so we find when the placement of these enterprises is that it not only prepares you for that internship and to impress that, the supervisor and the employer within that internship, you're coming back and you're refining and growing those skills yet again. And then even your 4th semester, so spring of your 2nd year, you can choose to do a different enterprise. So let's say you choose the consulting enterprise, you do your internship, and maybe you do want to be a consultant, maybe you don't. Well, after 2 semesters of an enterprise, you might think, actually it'd be really helpful to understand finance and understand how decisions are made. And so maybe then you do the funds enterprise. So lots of opportunity. I think it ends up being something like 28 required semesters. And then if you add on the additional 14 weeks, essentially like a full-time, what would be like a full-time or almost full-time job the entire time of the full-time MBA program. The other thing you can differentiate is thinking about when you're talking to schools, what type of projects that you might work on, or what type of companies do you work with? And that's, partially for visibility, but partially for your ability to choose and have an option. So if you really want to break into a certain industry, well, what companies, participate in our enterprise programs? Or, will I get my first choice or second choice if I want to? And because at Carlson, we're quite a small program, or about 80, maybe 90 students a year, probably 80, that when students choose, one of the 4 enterprises and people are sort of going to each one, you're getting your first or second choice that you want to do. So what's nice at Carlson, you can be very intentional, you can be very specific. And that's not necessarily true at some larger programs, or programs depending on their location and connections with companies and networks. So that's just something I would also encourage you to think about too, as you're exploring what options are there, what will my experience be like in experiential learning at this specific school. The other thing is, yes, it's important for visibility and network, but also what skills are you getting? I mean, it's great to work on these, but the skills are what really helps you market yourself to future employers. So, definitely a question that to keep asking and talking to each school, or, talking to current students about what skills did you gain? How valuable really is this experience that helped you in your career? So for Carlson, the brands and consulting enterprise are similar in that they have structured problem solving approach like a consultant. So there's a very methodical way that you get this problem, you build out what all the potential issues are, what could be potentially solutions. And it's a very structured approach that you could take that model and directly use in your internship or in your job if you become a consultant. The ventures enterprise can be similar, but it's much more ambiguous. So there's less, you might use a structured problem solving, you might not. So it requires much more iterative and design thinking than the brands or consulting. And then the funds enterprise really allows you to learn more about how financial decisions are made and really understanding the language of capital markets. So I just want to briefly, and I'll turn it over to Susanna shortly, just so she can expand a little bit more about the funds enterprise. But I wanted to just give everybody an idea like what a project would be in each enterprise. So the first one is the brands enterprise. This is, as I mentioned, having mostly to do with marketing or product management. And so this is a project from, I think, 2 years ago. And so the business, this was Sync Performance, which I believe at the time was sort of a smaller ski or winter sport company for professional athletes. And they wanted to optimize digital and influencer strategies, and I think maybe try to expand into a larger market. So they talked about how they did primary research, which is mostly interviews and analytics to determine what exactly that looks like. And then they used some secondary research. I think they worked with McKinsey, and then used things like Google Analytics and Facebook Insights, and then provided a business solution at the end, which was essentially, this is how you can go about expanding your market. So this is just an example. Within the brands enterprise, there's probably, as I mentioned earlier, like 10 projects to choose from. So, there might be a food and ag company, there might be a healthcare company. This one's a little bit of a smaller company trying to break into a larger market. So again, a lot of different opportunities for you within that.
Good night.
The consulting enterprise is probably the largest enterprise at Carlson. And I think it's mostly because, well, consulting is a pretty common career goal for students, but it also, you have the most wide-ranging projects. So I think that, it certainly attracts students. This again is just an example. The USGA is the US Golf Association. So golf is a very big sport in the US. And the business challenge was to provide sort of forward-looking approach to the golf industry's physical footprint and how to analyze the factors that are driving this change. And so they, similar to the previous example, they assessed trends and conducted primary interviews. They launched a survey of 5,000 golf courses to try to gain some insight, and then built a model for USGA for future physical footprint trends that they think might happen over the course of the coming years. And then, sort of provided that and talked a little bit about what was driving these changes and made that, suggestion at the end. So again, very similar to the previous enterprise, but that's one of the projects that they've worked on. The Carlson Ventures enterprise, so I mentioned earlier, you can either work with a startup company, or sometimes they have an already very established organization and are sort of exploring a new business venture. The Mayo Clinic is one of the largest and well-renowned hospitals here in Minnesota. It's about an hour south of the Twin Cities where we're located. And the business challenge was to foster innovation between health care and the environment for Mayo Clinic. So project details, they talked to prospective alliance partners to determine what the needs and interests were. They aligned, trying to align market and strategy. And then similar, did some client management, did a presentation, and identified what were some new business opportunities in various contexts. The reason I can't provide really too much information into a lot of these is oftentimes these companies we're signing non-disclosure agreements. So sometimes we can talk about the company, we can talk more specifically, but oftentimes we can't really talk too much about it. So that's why I'm being a bit more broad, but that's just to give you an idea. I won't spend too much time on the funds enterprise because, again, Suzanne is joining us and she lives and breathes this every day, but it's more of an investment model. student-led, student-focused run. And students are working in different industry teams to buy, sell, and hold recommendations. And so they're doing a lot of analysis. And I think what's really interesting and something that I've, certainly learned from Suzanne over time is there's a big emphasis on sustainability and sustainable investing, which I think is just becoming more relevant every second. So that's a really nice component to the funds enterprise. And then I will leave it over to Susanna.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I neglected to, I guess, introduce myself properly. And so I'll give you a little bit of my background because I think that's probably important to understand. Carlson, as I'm sure you're aware, has a world-class academic faculty, but each of the enterprise programs is really actually dominated by a professional who has personal experience in the type of work that you'd be doing in that enterprise. So for me, before coming to Carlson 6 years ago, I actually had a long career in the asset management business. I started working for JP Morgan in asset management in New York in 1985. And so had many years of making investment decisions about equities or about fixed income, currencies, derivatives. So a lot of different professional experience in the asset management world. And so that's the unique perspective that I bring to the funds enterprise. So the funds enterprise is not a project-based enterprise, as Jennifer mentioned. We're actually running an asset management business within Carlson. This asset management business has been continually running since 1998, and the long-term track record is actually phenomenal. The investments in both of our two funds have grown to now over $50 million. Students from the MBA program, as well as MS Finance and the undergraduate programs, all work together to make decisions about this portfolio. So just a few things to note. We are one of the largest student managed funds in the country, which makes us actually one of the largest student managed funds in the world. We are the first and only student managed fund currently to be a signatory for the Principles for Responsible Investment. And I'll get more into that a little bit later, but that's, I think, one of the things that really sets us apart. And finally, we really perform better than even many professional.
Whoa. All right.
Sorry about that. So from a performance standpoint, you are actually learning how to run a portfolio in the same way you would do it if you were in the professional asset management world. If you come to the next slide. All right, so there are 3 different ways that you can participate with the fund's enterprise program. The first is as an analyst with either our growth fund or our fixed income fund. So students in either of these 2 funds, they focus on building a financial model that helps them understand the companies that they're trying to invest. So it's modeling based, but it's also very important, and this is one of the things I really focus on with students, it's important to understand the story of each of the companies that we're trying to invest in. Students work in industry teams, and so one of the things that students maybe are a little bit I guess surprised by when they come into the funds is how much of it is group focused and not individual focused. I really think that the best way to make good investment decisions is by combining your modeling work with discourse or discussion with the other students on your teams. And then the third way that you can participate in the funds enterprise is on our sales and client service team, which we actually started just a few years ago. And David Camacho, who's in the funds enterprise, is on that team. And so, David, could you maybe talk a little bit about your experience with the sales and client service team?
Absolutely. And like Suzanne, I didn't fully introduce myself, so I'll just spend a couple seconds on that part. So much of what Jennifer shared on the intro is directly applicable to myself. So I graduated with an accounting degree from my undergrad and worked as a CPA for a few years, about 5 years. And then I realized, it wasn't for me. I wanted to make a pivot And so I decided to attend Carlson and enroll in the MBA program with a very intentional decision of trying to break into the asset management industry. And so with that in mind, I joined the Carlson Funds Enterprise. And I actually just recently signed up for a third semester within the Funds Enterprise because I've been enjoying it that much. And to be completely honest with all of you, it has been the highlight of my MBA experience. And I've really enjoyed it and the experience it's provided me thus far. So a little bit more about that experience. As Susanna just mentioned, I'm on the sales and client service team. And that's really allowed me to be able to take a top-down view of the different portfolios within, so the Carlson Growth Fund and the Fixed Income Fund. I've been able to work between both those portfolios and work with varying different industry teams. And not only have I been able to work with the different teams, I've been able to meet with, before COVID, in person, but since, virtually and online, different investment professionals in the Minneapolis market. So we have several large institutional investors that are directly invested in our funds. And so every month we write up performance reports, kind of outlining how we've done. Fortunately for me, it's been pretty easy as we've had really good performance over the past few years. So my timing in that regard was pretty fortunate. But I've been able to then interact with those investment professionals, be able to get in front of them and talk about our funds. And this type of interaction has been very valuable to myself because it's been a much more experiential learning, like Jennifer was sharing. And I'm a type of person that learns much more by doing. And this has given me just a wonderful experience to really be able to apply what we're talking about and learning about in more of a professional setting. And so there's a few different responsibilities, won't go too deep into all of them, but really just wanted to share with you that it really provides hands-on experiential learning and actually working and conversing and talking to and building relationships with professionals in the industry.
All right, so that brings us to the principles for responsible investment. And this is actually one of the most important things that I think we're doing in the funds enterprise. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of PRI, but the principles for responsible investment is part of, or was developed under the auspices of the United Nations. It is created by investment managers from all across the world, and it was started about 20 years ago. And the objective is to bring responsible investors together in the hopes of developing more sustainable markets across the world. And so as a signatory to PRI, that puts us in the company of the institutional asset management industry around the world. There's actually over $100 trillion of asset management money that is represented by PRI signatories. So we are in really good company. These are actually the standards that almost everybody in the professional investment business now adheres to. And so we integrate this directly into our program. So there are 6 principles. The first is we incorporate ESG issues into all of our decision making. Every single security that we buy, either on the equity fund or on the fixed income fund, includes an analysis of the environmental or social impacts that that firm might have. Second principles, we've pledged to be active owners of the securities that we invest in. And what that means is we actually engage with the companies that we're investing in. We'll talk to their investor relations team or their officers, and we'll let them know what we in investing with these particular companies. In fact, a couple of years ago, we actually engaged with a company that we were investing in for over a year to try to convince them to take one of our issues seriously. And because we didn't have success in that effort, we actually proposed a proposal that was on the company's annual proxy filing for the year. So the proxy filing for any public company in the US is the way that shareholders basically can get their issues heard by management. And so this by itself was a huge learning experience for students. The other principles for responsible investment include looking for appropriate disclosures. So one of the things that is really difficult in the ESG investment space right now is the lack of standardization of disclosures across all the different companies that we might invest in. And so we do reach out to our companies that we're looking for and ask for disclosures that will help us make our decisions. We promote acceptance and implementation of the principles, both by communicating with our own investors and also by public speaking. And so we'll speak to, for example, David might speak to a potential new client about the importance of PRI and how we'll use it in our decision making. And then the last point is that we do report on our activities every single year, just as an asset manager who is a PRI signatory would do. We have to file with the PRI and let them know what we are doing every single year. Let's see, let's go on to the next. All right, so a couple of typical career paths. So basically the job of finance is to give you some tools that you can use to make decisions about investing capital. And that is true whether you are working in corporate finance, for a corporation making investment decisions, or whether you are working in a capital markets facing job. So that's the basic problem of finance, is giving you tools to make decisions about capital deployment. And the reason why experiential learning is so important is that it is one thing to read about these tools in a book and to take a test. And I know many students who come away with really strong grades in the academic side, but then you sit down to actually do it. And without some practice, it can be really difficult to actually take those skills and integrate them. And so the funds enterprise gives you a really deep understanding of how to actually use the tools that you are learning in your academic coursework. And so from a technical standpoint, it's incredibly important. But the other thing that you also get out of the experiential learning program are soft skills. And this is true of experiential learning across Carlson. But in the funds enterprise, some of this is particularly pointed. So as David mentioned, he works with our clients. We've got to communicate with our clients every single month or more frequently if they need that. You have to develop critical thinking skills. And this is a really important piece of our program as well. What do I mean by critical thinking? Well, we're not telling you what the problem is, right? We're not scoping the problem out for you. We are letting you know that you have to follow these companies and you have to identify what the critical issues are. And so that's a really different skill than you're developing in most of your academic career. There's a lot of planning and time management. I give students a lot of flexibility over the course of the semester to focus on the things that are emergent or that they think are interesting. But at the end of the day, we have to make decisions about the companies that we're invested in. And we also have to make presentations to our investors and mentors. And then the final thing is in managing uncertainty. And that has become so incredibly important, particularly this year. We have to make decisions in the face of extreme uncertainty. When you're doing an analysis of a company, you're doing it based on your forecast of this company's prospects and your forecast of this company's ability to generate cash flows. But as we've seen in times like we've had in this past year, that can actually be really difficult to do. And the only thing we can't do is nothing. We have to make a decision, even though we don't know what the right answer is. And that is an incredibly difficult skill to learn in an academic setting. And I think it's one of the most important skills that students in the funds enterprise come out with. So, a lot of people, I guess, think about the funds enterprise as preparation for asset management careers or banking careers, which it certainly is. But I think that there is the truly understanding how to apply the tools of finance actually unlocks career potential no matter what your long-term career looks like. The ability to communicate and understand what's going on in capital markets is really a foundational skill. And that is what we focus on. So I think that brings us to the end, doesn't it? Yeah. So, I guess at this point, Jennifer, I don't know if you had any last comments, or are we going to just open up for questions?
Yeah, open up for questions. Before I forget, I do want to mention that by attending this session, if you ultimately decided that you're interested in Carlson and wanted to apply, this allows you, attending gives you an application fee waiver. So you won't have to pay to submit your application fee. So I wanted to make sure I said that before I forgot at the end of the session. But yeah, we're open to take questions.
Yay, thank you very much for that offer. One thing I would ask, frankly, if you could just drop the attendance list so that folks can fill in their names and email address, and I'll share that with Jennifer.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Yeah. Susanna, thank you very much for the very detailed deep dive into the enterprise program, and Jennifer as well as David. One thing I can see here as a big advantage is if you are someone looking and open to switching to asset management as a career, the program provides that soft landing for you to put something really tangible on your CV. As I can see how that turns out and play out. And I want David to just quickly talk about that, because I know one thing recruiters are looking for, and not just the fact that you add 90 over 100 in a course and asset management, but they want to see that real work experience. And David, given your experience with your classmates and also yours in the Funds Enterprise Program, how do you think that is translated into something that employers are able to relate with and call you up for an interview for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's been quite nice because there's actually a lot of people I've spoken to within the asset management industry here in the Twin Cities that actually attended Carlson at some point. And so I've talked to dozens of people that actually were either part of the Carlson Funds enterprise or know of it. And that's provided a great launching pad to kind of start the conversation. And it gives a lot of credibility to, in their eyes, you know, like, oh, okay, I know what this person is going through and the rigors of the enterprise program, the types of skills that they're using, among other things. In addition, I've been able to put this on my my resume. I believe you called it CV. Is that right, Samuel?
Yes, that is resume CV. We use both words.
Okay, cool. So I've been able to put it on mine as experience because I actually do, you know, have experience now that employers are looking for and valuing. For example, just recently, I was able to work with a few of my classmates and to put together a new client pitch deck and launch a tactical asset allocation strategy. And that's something that I've talked to with a few employers in just my recent interviews. And so the experiences that you have in your enterprise are definitely something you can put on your CV and talk to with potential employers.
I can see how that bullet point you just mentioned would look nice on my CV, just over to each space, but
Exactly.
So could I just jump in with a quick question for David? Because he sort of, I think he's done so much that it's hard to talk about all of it. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the trade that you just did this week, and you know how many securities you traded, and because it's actually like it's become secondhand for you at this point, so you don't even think anything of it. But maybe talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. And so yeah, Suzanne is exactly right. Sometimes I overlook some of these things because you know, it's becoming a little bit of a routine. So just yesterday actually, I bought and sold on behalf of the Growth Fund, $2.5 million worth of. So the trade involved selling about 2.5 million positions between three, and then we had to purchase about 5 different holdings, but much smaller positions, to increase our overall position size in these existing holdings. And then we attributed the remaining, it was about, about 7%.
1.7, yeah.
Yeah, about 7% of our overall growth fund into 2 different ETFs, which we're using to manage our overall equity exposure until we can find securities within the TMT, we call it, sector that we want to increase our exposure in. And so that was just something that we did, that I did yesterday under the guidance, working with our TMT equities team. So
that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing, really. It's really amazing that you're doing that while in an MBA program. And is it safe to assume that this is not just the case with the funds enterprise, that you'd also have the similar experience or possibility with a venture, consulting, and the last one, just keeping my mind right now.
Yes.
But the other venture enterprise program, is that what is obtainable there as well?
So I'm not going to speak too much on those because I don't have direct applicable experience, but I have friends that are in each of those different enterprises. And they've all been able to have hands-on experience with clients as well. So trading funds, trading equities and buying and selling, bonds, that's very specific to the Carlson Funds enterprise. But I have friends that are working in the Carlson Consulting enterprise, for example, that have been putting together pitch decks or presentations for clients on actual live strategic decisions that they're doing. And so it's work that many people would get paid for in a professional setting that they're able to perform in this learning environment.
Wow, thank you very much for that. And now I would open the floor up for anyone who has questions. It would be great to see your faces. I'll just crack a joke here so you guys understand. Power could be a bit easier with respect to connection at times. So if you don't see a lot of faces, most likely because it's dark. But if anyone has any question to ask, please feel free to unmute yourself or just type your question in the chat box. Okay, Daisy, do you have a question? I can see you mute.
Okay, Samuel, I have a question. This is Olamide.
Yes,
Hi, David. Thank you so much for this session. So I know that Carlson is very big on marketing. Marketing is actually one of the pathways where you have, I think, more than half or up to half the class size actually goes into marketing. So can you speak more about how the enterprise program is sort of helpful on the marketing pathway as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can just, I was going to say, Jennifer, that I'll take just a quick beginning part with what I know and then hand this one off to you because I think you'll be a little bit more well-versed. First of all, and is your name pronounced, is it Olamide? Olamide?
Well, it is, but you can call me Ola, so that's fine.
Ola,
Yeah.
Ola, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ola, and for the question as well. A lot of my classmates are in marketing and in the brand's enterprise because, as you said, it's one of the most popular kind of pathways in Carlson. And so, from my understanding, they work very closely with the enterprise director who has a lot of experience working in the marketing industry and a lot of connections as well. My knowledge doesn't go too much further in the marketing side beyond that, so I'm going to hand this one off to Jennifer.
I mean, that's a great example. I chatted the employment report here too, so for everyone can see like employment outcomes, but you're exactly right, Ola. Marketing is our top 3 in terms of outcome. And I think the enterprises were specifically built to mirror those outcomes, right? So finance is an outcome, a top 4 outcome, marketing is a top 4 outcome, consulting is a top 4 outcome, right? So we're trying to really give those students the experience to help with that career pivot and transition. Not to say if your career interest isn't something else, they don't still help, very transferable skills. But but I think that's, part of it. In a small program, we have a very large and robust career center that actually serves 8 other graduate programs. So they're quite large, but I think the full-time MBA, because it's so small and different, gets the benefits of having that large graduate business career center that manages those partnerships and has a career staff and contract career staff that work in industry. So a lot of support comes from that. But also, as David mentioned, your enterprise directors also help with career support because they are sourcing these projects. And so to source those projects, they need those connections because they are live projects that, they're paying Carlson for students to work on. So because they're sourcing those projects and because they have those connections, there's sort of can be an extension of the career center and helping you get in touch with those companies and positions that you're looking for as well.
Right. And I can see how that makes the recruiting process easy because you do have something to show for this. Oh, I'm not just putting this on my resume. There's something I can do. You can see me do it. Thank you very much for that feedback. When Susanna said she started her work experience in far back in 1985, I couldn't help but wonder where I was then. I'll leave you guys to try and answer, but I was probably nowhere to be found. But pretty interesting, and seeing how you, as a program, have been able to bring that wealth of experience into the school community, some added advantage, in my own opinion. Does anyone else have any question? I have a question here from someone, but before I take that, Kofi, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
My question is for someone who has a PhD in mathematics, how can he going to join the MBA program?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think sometimes there is this idea that if you don't have a business background, it's going to be, is there some prerequisites that are required or what's going to be the transition like? Most of our students are, quote, non-traditional. By non-traditional, I mean they didn't study marketing or management or finance in their undergrad. So most students are coming with a very unique background and set of experiences. There's no prerequisites that are required. And we even have like prerequisite or prep classes that you take part of your summer before and at orientation to help you prepare with some of the content you might not be familiar with. But that is actually a strength of yours. If you have, a background in mathematics is going to make you really strong in quantitative courses for us, but it's going to be different than a lot of our other student backgrounds. So for us, that actually, I think, it's a strength and something you'd want to highlight in your application. And certainly not something that we are concerned about within the admissions process. And that's true for most US MBA programs.
Right. And Jennifer, could you, it's a coincidence that the question sort of rhymes into each other. The question I have here is, what does the program look for in candidates? So if you could just delve into that a bit more, I think that would help you as well.
Yeah, I would say we're assessing candidates in 3 categories that we view equally as important in weight. So like 33.33% is your academic profile, the 33.33% is your professional experience, and then the last part is what we call your match to the program. And so academic, we're looking for a strong undergraduate GPA or GMAT or GRE score. We want to make sure that there's just the ability that we're setting you up for success in the program so that you can, be successful in classes like accounting and finance. Not necessarily, with the GMAT and GRE waiver, it takes a little bit of weight if you're eligible of that. So we really will then just look at your GPA from undergrad. The middle is your professional experience. And this can look different for a lot of different people, which is great. But in general, we want to see students who have taken on more responsibility within their career. Maybe they have formal promotions, or maybe they were just able to take on more responsibility by leading a team or leading a project. And we really want to see what that impact is like for you. I always say, in your position, there's a position description that you have, right, for your job that the person before you had and the person after you had. But there's something that you are, because you work at that organization, things are happening. And so what are those things, quantify and qualify, quality-wise, what are those things that you are doing at your organization that have the impact? And the last part is match. Why Carlson? Why University of Minnesota? Why an MBA now? What does it look like to be a part of Carlson for you? How will you contribute as a student? And so not only making sure that you're the right fit for us, but that we're the right fit for you as well. And so those are sort of the equal components that we're looking for, all important within an application.
And thank you, Jennifer. I can see a question in the chat box from Muidin. It says, hi, thanks for the session. For an international student who, though has an asset management background, but not familiar with the capital market landscape of the US, particularly in terms of regulation, how can this challenge be addressed in order to keep up to speed with making key investment decisions for any of the funds?
Let Suzanne.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that one. So the having an asset management background anywhere is going to be incredibly valuable experience. The decisions that we make are obviously in the context of U.S. capital markets, though, and so everything we do is evaluated against the U.S. alternatives. So the frameworks that you're using now are probably exactly the same frameworks, but the manner in which we go about making the decision is going to be guided by the U.S. capital markets alternatives. It's probably a little less about the regulatory framework. I mean, there's a few things about the U.S. regulatory landscape that kind of shape how we make decisions in our fund. And it's really more about just understanding the capital markets environment itself, so that you have an understanding of, what growth expectations are and what risk expectations are, and what the standards are for different markets and different types of companies. But the frameworks that you've got are, I'm sure they're pretty generalizable to the problems that we face. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, it does. And I think it links into another question that I have, which is for the program generally, as 90%, actually 99.999% of the participants here are all Africans, right? And there's a bit of cultural and system difference with respect to where we're coming from and what the program looks like in the US context. Is there some sort of buffer or gap way for us to try and catch up in terms of understanding what that difference looks like? I think I'm just trying to ask that question generally in terms of how do you onboard international students, especially from Africa?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the earlier students decide on a program, the more time you're going to have to prepare in terms of acclimating yourself to being in the US. So for us, every single student that confirms to Carlson has to meet with a career coach. And so this could be done in January or in June, whenever you decide that Carlson's the right fit. But once you confirm, you're already meeting with a career center to think about what are your career options? What is your personal branding? Do you have a LinkedIn page? If so, what does that look like? And how can we reframe it to make sure it's up to standards? And sort of getting that jump start from the career lens early on. We also have admitted student days that are throughout the semester as well, where you're connecting with current students and alumni in the Career Center to get a sense of what are the opportunities here, what is it like to transition into working in the U.S. or coming to school in the US. We also have a buddy program where we're pairing you with a current student that's either that is looking to share experiences that are similar. So maybe they're an international student, maybe they're an international student in a career that you want to get into. So making those intentional pairings to talk about, what it's like to transition into the US. Over the summer, we have that academic programming that I talked about. You have the support of your academic advisor. Once the spring hits, it's coming closer to your start date in the fall. You're really talking a lot with the student affairs and academic advising team. And then we actually have international orientation first. So we have 4 or 5 days where international students come to campus early, and there's just an orientation with them where you talk about, living in Minnesota, living in the Twin Cities, sort of, again, like what is it like to live here and sort of transition from where you're from. And then you have orientation with everybody else. So you sort of get that that attention and the support that you need first, and then you meet the rest of your classmates for orientation. That's like in a week and a half or 10 days right after that. So there's a lot of support. I mean, that's the benefit of a small program, is a lot of high touch engagement. And if you ever have questions or concerns, like we have a Facebook group, and like I said, the buddy program, there's a lot of opportunity to just raise your hand and say, hey, I need to learn a little bit more about this. Even in the admissions process, we are making connections with current students and alumni now to help you make that decision. So, and a lot of schools do that. So I would encourage you to reach out and ask, like, hey, I just want to be connected with a current student who's from Nigeria or an alumni from Nigeria, and so they can talk about their experiences now.
Awesome. Great. And thank you very much for that very detailed response. I know we're 5 minutes past 9.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, is there any question before we wrap this up that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, somebody asked about funding, which I can briefly mention, because I think that's important. Great. Yeah. So scholarships at Carlson are automatically considered at the time of admission. So when you apply, if you're admitted, you're automatically reviewed for funding. We're making merit-based decisions, which means we look at your GMAT or GRE score, your GPA from undergrad, and then we also are quantifying our interview, which is a way that we're quantifying qualitative and soft skills. And so those, and your work experience. So we're using those parameters to award funding. For the GMAT and GRE, we're actually using GMAT benchmarking percentiles. So our median GMAT score at Carlson, for example, is a 680. But in Nigeria, that might be something different. So we're actually using percentiles from GMAC, who creates the GMAT exam, puts out a lot of data. We're using their percentiles and their medians to determine what is, a competitive score in Nigeria compared to the US, because it's just a bit more equitable doing it that way. And we also, there's been a push over the last couple of years. I think there's been now more of an institutional change of wanting to, the importance of diversity in our class. And so that's also another component that we're looking at within not only the admissions process, but scholarship as well. So we've had a handful of students that have graduated from Nigeria. I started recruiting last year, as Samuel mentioned. We now have 3 incoming students from Ghana for 2021. So, funding is really important to us in helping you make your education more accessible. But we're continuing to try to do that and increase the diversity of our class by doing even presentations like this. So I would encourage you to apply to see what your funding looks like. If you have questions about your funding, I'm happy to have that conversation, loan options, anything like that, that you want to talk more about. I'm happy to chat. I'll also drop, before we turn off, an appointment calendar for the admissions team. We have appointments multiple times a day, every day. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to just put 30 minutes on our calendar.
Right. Thank you very much. And as we look to round up, there's one question from Obi here that says, what are the common mistakes you see in an application to Carlson?
So could I maybe just jump in a little bit on that one, and then Jennifer, I'm sure you have a lot more to add for that. So the enterprise directors do all get involved in reviewing the applications as well. And one of the things that frequently comes up is there's always a concern when an applicant is unable to articulate why an MBA makes sense for them in the context of their career. And so that's something that you really should take advantage of the opportunity to speak to a lot of different people so that you can tell a really clear story about why an MBA makes sense for you at this point in your career. So we get a lot of applicants where it's maybe too early, or where we don't really understand what they're trying to achieve by applying to an MBA program. So I think that's probably the most important sort of big picture thing that you could focus on, is telling a really clear story about what you would like to get out of the MBA program.
That's great. That would be the number one thing. So that is perfect. I think also just knowing the school. So often I see an essay that could also apply to another, Indiana or Kelly or Washington. And I'm like, I don't really know why they're interested in Carlson. They say they want to do experiential learning, but like, what does that, what does that mean? So it's great to attend a session like this, where you're actually taking a deep dive into the school and the content and what's different. But yeah, research, connecting to students, all really important to help showcase your knowledge and also investment in the school, because we want to know why you like us, why we're special, why you want to come here. So doing that research is important. Yeah.
Also, make sure you use Carlson's name and not the other school's name in your essay. Just me.
It does happen.
It does happen.
I know.
Right.
There was a question. Sorry, there was one more question about whether the MBA is STEM designated.
Yeah.
Our MBA is not currently STEM designated, but the MS Finance program is STEM designated. And I know there's discussions going on about adding a possible STEM designation, but currently not right now.
Yeah, we're hoping, fingers crossed, for next year, for the incoming 2021, but we're still waiting on University of Minnesota approval. So once we find that, we'll be communicating that. Once that's solidified, we'll be communicating that out to everybody in our pipeline. So another reason to sign up and put your email down so you know when that happens.
Right. And do we have space for one more question? I've seen the chat box here.
I know, there's so many questions. And well, I think too, if you have questions about like application stuff, just email me and we can have a separate conversation. But everything is virtual this year. So virtual interviews, even if you live down the street, it's a virtual interview. So it's sort of levels out the playing field in that way. Although I would say in person and virtual, there's no real difference. For us in years past, we assess them the same way. And you can complete your GMAT waiver before you apply. So you can see if you're eligible for a GMAT waiver. It's in our application, so you'll have to start an application. But you can see if you're approved from the waiver before you submit. So before you, decide if it's a great, good fit for you, you can see if that that is applicable at the time. Just upload your resume and transcript.
Right. And what should interviews be keen about during virtual interview?
Say that one more time. Sorry.
Yeah. What should be an interviewee be keen about in this virtual interview world that we live in?
Oh, no, I think that, wear something that you, in terms of professional dress, wear something that you feel comfortable in and that you feel confident in. There's not any specific criteria on that. And I think, in preparing for interviews, just make sure that you're talking about your, have a good story of your professional background, have that down, have those, that story and connection of, this is where you graduated from, this is your experience so far, this is why an MBA, sort of that, giving us that, that full story. And then my other recommendation would be to just think about your career highlights so far. So, think about that greatest accomplishment, think about those standout times where you took an initiative or really proud of something. And then on the flip side, the time you made a mistake and the time you received constructive criticism. Those standout moments that made your career unique will be certainly questions and answers that you'll want to make sure you tell admissions committees.
I want to say a very big thank you to you guys, David, Jennifer, and Susanna, for the time you spent with us today, especially 30 minutes past the time we're scheduled for. Thank you so much today. We appreciate seeing your faces, and hopefully next year when we're doing this, we'll also be able to have you guys join us once again for that.
Amazing.
On that note, I'd say thank you and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to do this. Yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. So what happens, guys, we sometimes wait back to try and take your questions, to try and get a feel for where you are. I will quickly share. Oh, I should stop recording first of all, right?